Hello, can you hear me? Hi, everyone. I'm Liz Farrell, Artistic Director of Painting, Drawing, and Printmaking, and our Artists in Residence program. Welcome to Anderson Ranch's Visiting Artist Lecture Series with artist Saúl Hernández-Vargas, and it's generously supported by the Lee and Reggie Smith Glassell School of Art Core Residency Fellowship at the ranch. I want to welcome our virtual participants watching tonight as well. Before we begin, please silence your cell phones. And for our land acknowledgement, I want to recognize that the Anderson Ranch campus resides on the historic tribal lands of the Ute people, who've called this area home for over 800 years. In honor of this legacy, we focus on building an inclusive community here, maintaining this as a place for inspiration and creativity in the center of the Rocky Mountains. Saúl is an interdisciplinary artist who has exhibited and performed recently in the Houston Climate Justice Museum, the Contemporary Art Museum of Houston, and the Lawndale Arts Center in Houston. He has been an artist in residence at the Center for Imagination in the Borderlands, Arizona State University, and the core program at the Museum of Fine Arts of Houston. His work has been discussed at the Tyranny of Common Sense by Irmgard Emmelheins, published by Sunny Press. Saúl holds an MFA in Visual Arts from the University of California, San Diego, and an interdisciplinary PhD from the University of Houston. So if you can all join me in welcoming Saúl.
Hello, thank you so much. So, I'm kind of concerned about my rebozo. I hope my rebozo looks good. But I want to start by saying thank you so much to the Anderson Ranch for this gift, the gift of time and the gift of a space and this critical community of makers. And I really want to say thank you so much to all of you who decided to come here to listen to me. I'm grateful. Thank you so much. You know, I've been thinking about like what to show and how to talk about my work for some days. And originally, I really wanted to talk about my most recent solo exhibition, my first solo exhibition in a Mexican museum in Oaxaca, Mexico. But instead, I think I decided to talk about a discovery, something I discovered or something I realized or something that I remember thanks to that exhibition. And I think what I discover or what I remember is that I am a visual artist interested in ruins, interested in rubble, in debris, in fragments, in broken objects. And kind of like in this exercise of, thinking about my work and trying to dig into my computer and looking into my archives, I was thinking like where these interests in broken objects start. So I went to 2009 to this piece. This was an intervention to a limestone factory in my hometown in Oaxaca, Mexico. And this is maybe the first piece where I use or where I show like something that looks like a ruin. But the idea of ruin was not fully there. I mean, it looks like a ruin, but for me, this was about, the politics of Mexico in some of the most violent years of the so-called war against drugs. This was about like kind of everything falling apart, but the ruin was not fully there. However, in 2016, I started working on a series of projects about earthquakes. I'm from southern Mexico, I'm from Oaxaca, Mexico, and Oaxaca is one of the most geological complex states in Mexico. Most of the earthquakes start in Oaxaca. So earthquakes have reshaped and have built actually the city. I mean, they destroyed the city and at the same time they rebuilt the city. So I feel like kind of like thinking and interested in the agency of earthquakes, the agency of land, the agency of the territory, and this territory that is always moving and shaking. Since this is kind of like an important project for my work, just let me put this in here. Let me tell you an anecdote that could be useful to keep talking and to keep like looking at some of these pieces. And then I would like to show you like this short piece, is like almost 6 minutes piece, that it gives you like some context and it shows like another kind of work. It's kind of different to the work I'm doing, at least here, and the kind of work that I'm showing in Oaxaca. So in 1931, January 1931, one night around 8 p.m., it was very cold, it was raining too. An earthquake destroyed my hometown. 80% of the public infrastructure was destroyed. 2/3 of the population moved from Oaxaca to places like Puebla in central Mexico or Mexico City. And a lot of people just decided to kind of like live at the open. Like they were like really afraid about the earthquake, so they started like sleeping outside in their gardens or in the streets. So for me, like this earthquake, the earthquake of 1931, is like the foundational event of my hometown. And I say this because this happens in 1931. A year later, in 1932, one day, a Saturday morning, an archaeologist, a very famous archaeologist, discovered one of the major findings of Mexican archaeology, which is called Tomb 7 in Monte Albán, Oaxaca. And it was like a really important discovery for various reasons. I'm not gonna say more about this. Maybe I could say more if you want, like later. But the important thing here for me is like in 1931, everything was broken. The earth was broken. The tectonic plates were like broken, and then kind of like the archaeological pieces like came out. So that's kind of like the metaphor that is important to me, and it's kind of like being present in all my work. So let's watch this piece, please. It's like a 5 minutes video, and then I'm gonna talk more about it. Yeah.
Hola estimados amigos, mi nombre es Josh Pérez. Pertenezco a una joven generación de ingenieros y reformistas californianos con profunda admiración y cariño por México. Por eso les envío este mensaje. Han pasado ya 7 días desde aquel triste y trágico 14 de enero en que su ciudad, la hermosa ciudad de Oaxaca, fue destruida. Las noticias son alarmantes. Hasta hace poco reportaban que 114 personas perdieron la vida y que 1/3 de la ciudad estaba derruido. Todas esas imágenes son estremecedoras, es cierto, pero son más estremecedoras las advertencias de falta de comida y de la probable extensión del cólera y de otras enfermedades. Mis condolencias para todas las familias que perdieron algún ser querido. Por otro lado, esto podría constituir una oportunidad para enfrentar la tragedia pensando siempre en la modernidad y el progreso. Sí, estimados amigos, lo que aquí les propongo es que respondan como el siglo XX y la historia se los demandan. Concretamente, lo que les propongo es que realicen la operación Jipetetec. Detengámonos un momento y viajemos hacia el 29 de junio de 1925. 6 años atrás, en ese día, un terremoto similar destruyó la villa agrícola de Santa Bárbara, California. Después del terremoto, esta se redujo a escombros por los que se arrastraron la tristeza y la zozobra. Pero esto significó una oportunidad para que dos personas visionarias, Hoffman y Chase, eliminaran la arquitectura morisca que predominaba en el sitio y en ese sentido transformaran la pequeña villa en una ciudad española de acuerdo a su pasado colonial y de acuerdo a su proyecto futuro. 4 años más tarde, el edificio de la corte, recientemente terminado, se convirtió en una importante atracción turística cuya derrama económica sumó millones de dólares. Chase y Hoffman nos enseñaron que la crisis era la única vía para conseguir un cambio verdadero. Creo que algo parecido podría suceder en Oaxaca. Esta operación no requiere del genio de Chase y Hoffman, sino solo un poco de imaginación, un montón de joyas y un enterrador para sepultarlas en un sitio determinado. Y luego, alguien que las descubra. Mucho más concretamente, Alfonso Caso, el joven arqueólogo que trabaja en la zona de Monte Albán, podría descubrir dichas joyas supuestamente enterradas en el siglo VIII después de Cristo. Entonces, podríamos anunciar el hallazgo en los periódicos internacionales. Gran hallazgo arqueológico. Esas serían las palabras que reemplazarían a las que actualmente circulan en los medios. Me refiero a las palabras tragedia, muerte, hambre y enfermedades. Sí, eso que para algunos sería considerado como un fraude, para Oaxaca significaría su entrada a las páginas de la historia y millones de dólares que confirmarían su importancia como atracción turística. Si me atrevo a enviarles este mensaje, es para recordarles que las crisis deben enfrentarse con imaginación y mano firme. Apoyen al gobierno del estado en la reconstrucción del sitio. Si ustedes tienen joyas provenientes de Monte Albán o de zonas aledañas, por favor dónenlas, entiérrenlas de nuevo. Recuerden que el futuro de Oaxaca podría parecerse a un artefacto arqueológico esperando en el fondo de una tumba. Gracias por su atención y recuerden mucho cuidado con los comunistas que revolotean por el sitio. Buenas noches.
Thank you. So, ah, but I mean, this video had to be activated. So, I mean, the video was like a part of the gesture, but the gesture needed something else. And so basically this video was a piece to leave on internet. I posted on a blogspot. And then I wrote a series of pieces on Wikipedia. I was like always like changing different entries about Tomb 7, about Montalban, about Alfonso Caso, about Oaxaca, about Mexico, and about the logo of I Love New York. So according to this narrative, I Love New York is based on my video. So I was like always like messing with these Wikipedia entries, and there were like people always complaining. And for example, here it says intento de desacreditación, discredit intent. And so, you know, like I was like writing pieces, and then someone like was like making corrections, and then I went back and I was like kind of playing with those corrections. And I was like doing that for some years until 2019, and I had like a project on Twitter. I was doing memes and like changed letters to the Mexican government, and kind of like playing with the institutions in charge of patrimony. I mean, because when you deal with patrimony, you are dealing with the very image of the nation state. I'm not going to talk more about this, but basically that was kind of part of the idea. For a long time, you know, in my first years as an artist, I did a lot of work also on websites and kind of digital projects, and I was very interested in these kind of pranksters, neo-Luddites. That's how you say it, neo-Luddites? Do you remember like the Luddites who were like sabotaging machines during the Industrial Revolution? So I was always like thinking on these like guys who were like doing things on internet. So another iteration of the project was a series of pirate versions, pirate editions that I was selling in flea markets in Oaxaca, Mexico. That happened in 2018, and it was just kind of funny because for me, you know, a sign of the success of the project was actually when people go back to my Wikipedia entries and make comments and corrections and like, you know, things like this. But eventually a magazine from my hometown wrote an article about the history of the Tomb 7 using my video as one of the most important references. I don't have the image. I could share it with you if you are interested. Just like as a background, you know, for some years, I also was interested in informal economies and just like how to do things with no money. So I belonged and I created a series of collectives in my hometown, and I was part of this Plan B. This Plan B was founded by Luis Hampshire and Jessica Bosny. And we did like a lot of projects that started with the question, how could we like have an international show with no money? So we were invited to do something in France with actually now a very interesting curator, Catalina Lozano, and we just had like a cardboard box that we just had money to pay for that cardboard box. So we were like 10 people, and we were like making, you know, sound pieces, paintings. I was making flip books and keychains, and you know, some people were like working on videos and other stuff, or sometimes we did like projects like this one, just jukeboxes where we shared our favorite music, and we did like sonic projects, noise and whatever. This is another project by Plan B. It was kind of like a taco stand, and it was like an important project dealing with questions about displaying devices for our work. I think this is like around 2005, and I haven't seen and I haven't shown these photos like in 15 years or so, and I'm excited, and I think that in many different ways could be helpful to see the rest of the pieces that I want to show you. So I did the video about the earthquake, and earthquakes were important, and earthquakes destroy things, let's say. From my point of view, earthquakes produce and make things too. But and then in 2013, which is the year when I moved from Oaxaca to Tijuana, Mexico first, and then to San Diego, California, I found like a series of objects that were used by my grandfather, this guy who is smiling, proud of his work. with my mother, who is just happy because she's next to him. He was a jeweler and he was a beekeeper who dedicated his life to produce archaeological replicas for national museums and also for tourism and the tourist market. He made other kinds of jewelry, like everything. So I just found like this broken mold, this photo. He cleaned the crown of this virgin, and these wax objects. I mean, objects for the lost wax process, right? So when I migrated to the US, I migrated with these shoe boxes full of broken objects. And I was thinking a lot about these broken objects. Some of those broken objects, as I said, are like replicas of archaeological pieces. And then I started thinking like, what's kind of my relationship with archaeological pieces? If you have been in Mexico, and I don't know if this happened in many other places, but in Mexico, I would say that the only place to engage in any kind of dialogue with these objects is through the National Museum or the History Museum of the Anthropology Museum, right? So this is like these objects are always framed by national museums and by the discourses of disciplines like archaeology, anthropology, history, art history, I mean, like many different discourses. So I kind of like, so at some point in 2016, I was like, something that I really want to do is like to reframe these objects, avoiding like the pedestals of the museum, the bonnets of the museum, and just kind of like the discursive frameworks also for historical or indigenous objects. So in 2016, I made like this series of sculptures made of clay. I used like 2 different types of clay. So this is from San Bartolo, Coyotepec, in Oaxaca, in the valley of Oaxaca, and these 2 are from Atzompa, also in the valley of Oaxaca. And then these were like kind of like broken sculptures, and I placed like these little objects kind of like inhabiting like these landscapes, let's say. In those years, I was like in the MFA, and because of the MFA, I was like reading a lot about, I don't know, the new materialisms, the object-oriented ontology, the vibrant matter, and those things, right? But I think like one of the most interesting and productive readings for me was Marcel Mauss. I read The Gift, by this crucial thinker for social sciences. And Marcel Mauss is talking about like some ritualistic objects, and I don't remember from where. I'm sorry, I don't remember now, but he's talking about these ritualistic objects as objects that are imbued with the energy of the places where they come from, especially the materials. I mean, the places of imbued with this energy. So I was thinking, like, like maybe these clay objects are imbued by the energy of this Oaxaca territory, and maybe these objects are kind of able to resurrect the objects made by my grandfather. My grandfather passed away in 1985, and since 1985, these objects like remain in those like little boxes, like hidden in a room. And I was thinking like maybe these objects are kind of death, and maybe these objects are also the remains of my grandfather in a way. So I was kind of like thinking how to resurrect the objects, how to reframe the objects, how to make them alive once again. This is the first time I show like one of these pieces. The piece here is not mine; it's by Trevor Amery. But this was the first iteration of this sculpture made of black clay. I've been traveling with these sculptures. These sculptures were made in Oaxaca. I was adjusting my status. I couldn't go back to Mexico for a couple of years. They arrived into Tijuana. Friends, really good friends, like went to Tijuana to pick the pieces up, to move the pieces to San Diego. And eventually I moved the pieces to Houston, Texas, and some of them have been in places like Austin. So in many different exhibitions, especially the red piece and the black one, like were damaged. But I mean, I'm talking about fragmented objects. So I mean, like it's kind of like, I mean, I don't really care. I mean, I care because I mean they look different, but I was thinking like, okay, I mean, maybe I need to do a different kind of gesture to use this material. So I was invited to the Museum of Contemporary Art of Oaxaca this year to do a solo show in 3 rooms of the first floor of the museum. And what I wanted to use like the red clay for that exhibition. So, and I wanted to use these pieces for a piece about earthquakes and kind of like tectonic plates and things that are always like moving and shaking. So, you know, I don't know, how do you call these little section of the door here in English? In Spanish, I would call it el derrame de la puerta, the derrame of the floor. And this derrame has a diagonal, right? So I wanted kind of like to reshape the room, to move the room following this diagonal, and then like reorganizing the room in a way. So this is like another drawing of that. And this is a show that I just opened, so I don't have like all the general views, just like photos taken with my cell phone. But I want to show you. So this is like one of the how do you say details of this installation. This is like a general a view of the installation about this earthquake. So one of the difference between the previous projects, the plates projects, and this one is, I mean, here I just have like some sections of the clay squares, and the materials, in some cases I have like wax on the top, but in some cases I have metal too. And this was like a funny finding to me because, you know, over the course of the years, I've been like also like breaking the wax objects, and I've been like kind of always sad because I don't have anything else, or I don't have like too many other things from my grandfather. So when I break an object, sometimes I'm thinking like, how can I preserve these objects? So I decided to cast everything, and kind of it was like a beautiful, interesting metaphor, right? Because in order to preserve the wax objects, I had to melt them down. So I kind of like I'd lost the wax, but I keep something. I don't know how to call it, but that kind of alchemical process, let's say, it's been interesting to me. And this exhibition also included like some fragments of letters of people who were asking for help to the government of my hometown. They wanted to have like just homes, like beautiful and just safe homes. Fue bastante lo que sentí cuando. It says something like, it was a lot what I felt when, something like this. So there, it's also like a broken phrase. And this is just like you know, the earthquake and this broken element has a different iterations. Sometimes drawings, sometimes videos, sometimes sculptures, and other kind of pieces. And of course, I've been interested in also remains, especially remains. Link or attached to these archaeological burial sites, and kind of notions of ghosts and specters and spectrality. And I mean, like this, a ghost and a specter is something that is not occupying the space, but is haunting the space, right? It's always coming back. And for me, the thing that is always coming back is indigeneity and indigenous people in Mexico. In this photo, I have like two gestures. On the one hand, here, this is called Tomb 7, and and here I have a piece called "The Flayed Ones." Oh, I'm okay. So please, do you see like these lines here? Kind of. So this is the shape of the burial site in Oaxaca, the Tomb 7. And this is a recreation of the burial site in I think the National Museum around the 30s. So for me, kind of like the drawing, I mean, this drawing, I mean, it has the shape of the burial site, but it's a drawing made by one of the archaeologists. And for me, this drawing is one of the first frames for these archaeological pieces. So I've been thinking a lot about like how to frame, how to display a historical object. And in this, and here, I have like this is a piece made of river, and there are like some volcanic stones, and then some objects made of copper and brass mostly. And this is a reference to human remains. This is a reference to ceramics, and this is a reference to jewelry. The important thing for me about the human remains here is, and sometimes I need to contextualize a lot, but I hope this makes sense. Mexico as a state, as a modern state that started in the 19th century, present itself as the continuation of an indigenous past, right? And Mexico created the figure of the mestizo, right? We are mestizos, people with, I don't know, a Spanish father and then an indigenous mother. But that's just kind of like a fictional way to talk about Mexican people, because we have a different origins, right? Even in Mexico. So I'm just interested in the human remains found in this burial site, because I'm always wondering like whose body, I mean, it's the body of the Mexican, it's the body of the Mixteco person there, it's the body of me, it's the body of my grandfather. I mean, whose body? These are just like some of the references about like some references that were important to me during the process of making this piece. On the right, it's the Anahuacalli. It's this beautiful, stunning museum made by or designed by Diego Rivera. And then those are like just like a photo of a museum in Istanbul, Turkey. The flayed ones. So this is an important piece for me for various reasons. So the flayed one is like a very important mythical figure in Mexico. It represents the figure of someone who is wearing actually the skin or the flesh of someone else. So if you see, I don't know if you see like these straight lines here in the face. So that's kind of like the edge of the face of someone who was sacrificed. And if you see like, maybe in this one, you don't see like the eyes, but there are like the eyes. And then there is like this is the symbol, the symbol in the Mexican flag. So, in this case, I made these pieces. I made a mold of one of the Xipetotecs. That's the name of this piece. I made a mold of one of my grandfather's molds, and I made it and I cast it on bronze, which I think like is just like a metal that is closer to me as a visual artist. But I also wanted to play with other metals that maybe were closer to him, just like silver in this case. In the case of these pieces, there was like something very important to me, which is the shadow. If you see a historical object, and sometimes, if we just go back, for example, here, sometimes in these historical museums, objects don't have shadows. And that's kind of weird, right? And sometimes, or they are depicted, they are photographed without shadows. That's interesting because I mean, if just if we think in terms of drawing, I mean, we need shadows, right, to produce volume. We need shadows to see that something is resting here, that something is resting on a surface. And so I was kind of like always wondering why historical objects don't have a shadow. And I mean, like I could try to, elaborate and say like, oh, I'm interested in the shadow, like using like this philosopher or whatever. But just that experience, I mean, the experience of looking at these objects without shadows made me think that I really, if I wanted to reframe the objects, I needed like a strong shadow for these objects. This is a photo taken recently by a photographer. I wasn't in Oaxaca, and it was interesting. He sent the photo, and for me, the shadow was the most important part. And I've been looking at the photo since yesterday, and I'm like, oh man, should I like take it out? But I'm like, I mean, we're trained to see objects without shadows, at least these kind of objects. So I just decided to leave it because I think it's interesting just to see how someone else is looking at these objects, right? The other like kind of important element to me for these pieces was kind of like, there is like the face, these like the shipetotic, and there is a post, and there is a wall. So I was thinking, well, kind of the wall represents for me, I mean, the museum, maybe the state, maybe a narrative without cracks nor fissures. And then I always have the question like, but where am I in this case? Where am I in this like national narrative? I mean, am I like someone who is inhabiting the post? Am I like closer to the wall of the museum? Am I closer to the object? I'm not really sure. I don't have like an answer for that, but I'm always thinking on that, on the distance. So I'm going to show you just like 3 more photos. And then I've also like been interested in just like kind of how to listen to these objects. I mean, like these objects have been appropriated, expropriated, used by museums and by many people. And I was wondering, what if these objects don't want to be depicted and they don't want to be used anymore by these historical museums? What if these objects organize a collective strike? So I mean, like, I don't know if you know, I mean, the black and red flag is one of the flags that we use in Mexico for a strike. So I decided to use like this object for this kind of like a strike piece or a strike gesture for one particular reason. This is a very complicated object to reproduce. Jewelers don't do it anymore. It's a bell. The belly of the object is a bell. And because it's a bell, it's very hard to do something with it. It's very hard to make earrings. It's very hard to make a necklace. It's very hard to do a ring. It's kind of like, so people decided that this is not something that they are gonna make and sell in some of the jewelries in Oaxaca. So it was like, oh, this is the perfect object. It's kind of like an object that it's been avoiding consumption for many years. So this murciélago, this bat, is kind of like the first object in a strike. And then he invited like 2 other objects to join the strike. One is a bird, and the other one is just like an old guy. So this is the bird, but I mean, like the bird is more like playful with the strike flag. So I'm gonna do a gesture, a performative gesture this summer, inviting like other objects to join the strike with this guy and the bat and the other one. This photo, I just. Looking at the previous photos I show, for example, the taco stand that I show you at the beginning, there is always a question about how to display pieces. And I just realized that I'm always thinking on not how to finish a piece, but how to display it. That's kind of like the main question for me. So I'm always thinking on, am I gonna use a color on the walls? Is this like a color that is just gonna be on one room, or it's going to the second room? So I kind of like, I found a common thread in this practice. And of course, I feel like learning jewelry just to be able to make those pieces. And I think I'm gonna finish with these two pieces that are kind of landscapes, and these landscapes are made of the sandpaper that I use during the learning process of jewelry. So I collected all the sandpaper to make like a series of pieces, kind of like they're like different sizes. And I like the sandpaper because it keeps the metal that I use, and I also have like some of the fragments that I always collecting. I don't know if you, maybe not so many of you have been in my studio here, but I've been just traveling literally with a box of fragments and little things. So so these little fragments are literally just the debris of my kind of jewelry education. And maybe to close, and I wasn't planning to finish here. When I was timing out myself in the cabin, I was able to talk about like 70 slides, different projects, performative gestures too. But anyway, I'm gonna finish here, and just with an idea that I think could be useful. I would like to go back to the earthquake. One of the thinkers that is important to me is Edward Glissant. Edward Glissant has this beautiful book, Poetics of Relation. Edward Glissant is like someone that we read when we discuss about translation, for instance. He's from Martinique. It's an archipelago, right? Like very close to Puerto Rico, actually. But it's, claimed by France. So Edward Glissant was writing a lot about the thinking process of the earthquake, or the thinking of the shaking, el pensamiento del temblor, that's in Spanish. And el pensamiento del temblor, basically what Glissant is talking about, Glissant, he's from Martinica, again, this island. He's completely against monolithical narratives. He's completely against about continental narratives. He's against these like solid, strong narratives, right? And then he says, well, the earthquake is actually opposed to these narratives. But the beautiful phrase in Spanish, I think it says something like, to understand the world, the world is shaking all the time, we need to shake at the same time. And just like thinking on the current context, in the US and in the world, I think like it's interesting and maybe important to think, in which directions and how this is shaking and how we can shake together. Thank you so much, and I'm happy to answer like any kind of questions. Thank you. Yes. Thank you.
Now that you're in the Anderson Art Ranch at altitude and experiencing hopefully some performative gestures, what's your favorite medium here? Or do you have access to the ceramics and the woodworking, and how are you expounding upon your beautiful art?
Oh, thank you. I'm interested in metal work, and like William Iris, like having helpful to keep working on metal, and there is a reason for that too. When I came, I did what I sometimes do with it, and that was like reading about Aspen and the area, and I realized that this was a mining town. Right, and silver has been an important metal for the region, and kind of like when, I'm not gonna tell you the story. You know the story better than myself, right? But I was thinking like, like there is this relationship with the metal, I mean, with the aesthetics of the metal, with the economics of the metal, with the politics of the metal. So in the studio here in the cabin, I'm working on some like little objects. I'm gonna make some stands in the metal shop, like kind of how do you call it? Que se ensamblan. Huh? Modular. Thank you so much, Beck. Yeah, modular pieces. But yeah, I think metal, and really, I'm interested. I'm looking forward to go to see, like, to go to one of the tours in one of the mines here, right? The Smugglers, I think that's the name. So I'm very, very interested, and I know that Colorado has a relationship with mining also, like coal and other materials. So that's kind of like interested. But maybe, I think like I'm interested in metal because metal it could be understood as an archive of the planet too. I mean, metal has been here forever and ever. It's been shaped by, I mean, like geological processes, and it's been also looking and facing and suffering also because of extractivist economies sometimes and many other processes. So I think like metal is just like a rich material that, I don't know, it's kind of like a material that talks to myself all the time. Thank you.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Saúl. It was good to hear from you, and thanks everyone for coming. Have a good night.
Thank you.